Some of the names in this case have been changed due to the individuals being minors. Brett Taylor Wittner was born June 1st, 1997. He lived with his parents, Donna and David Wittner, and two siblings, Tyler and Tyra, in Covington, Louisiana. He was described as intelligent, sociable, caring, and fun-loving. On February 24, 2012, Brett, who was now a 14-year-old freshman at Covington High School, had gotten permission to go to a movie and spend the night at a friend's house. However, on that Friday night, 8 teens piled into a vehicle, along with 2 adults, to commute 45 minutes for a co-ed sleepover party at the home of Rodney Griffith and his girlfriend April Gailey. Brett's mother did not know this couple and only knew one of the teens. April, the homeowner's girlfriend, later said that when her daughter asked if all the kids could stay at her house, she said yes, but they needed to call their parents. The home was located on Louisiana 439 in Franklinton, Louisiana. Brett's parents were unaware that Rodney and April were taking their child anywhere because Brett never called for permission like April had requested. As a matter of fact, most of the kids didn't ask for permission that night. Therefore, they were either not told to call their parents or they lied and said that they did. Rodney and April went to bed around midnight, leaving 2 guns by their back door, a .22 caliber rifle and a 20 gauge shotgun. The girls were supposed to sleep out in the camper and the boys in the home. During the testimony given, one kid said Brett kissed another of the boys' girlfriends, who I will call Tommy. Tommy picked up one of the guns by the kitchen door, and Brett picked up the other gun, which was a .22 caliber lever-action rifle. At this point, another boy and girl were in the room at the time, who I will call Sarah and Jet. Sarah supposedly turned her head and didn't see what happened after this point. Jet said that he saw Tommy put his gun down and walk away. The next thing the 3 of them knew was that they heard a noise and then Brett fell to the floor. Jet felt something hit his foot, which turned out to be a spent bullet casing. Jet said he picked up the casing and threw it at Brett's head and told him to get up and stop playing, and then he saw the blood and realized it was not a joke. It is of note that later another spent bullet casing was found inside the chamber of the rifle. April, the adult female in the home, then called 911. The 911 call that April made can be heard using the link in the description. The 911 call came in at 6:36 a.m., but the shooting happened at 6 a.m., according to the people in the house at the time. Brett's mother believes that they all took this time to get their story straight before calling. During the 911 call, the caller sounds calm, and the kid in the background answering questions sounds very calm as well. Strangely, when April made the 911 call, she stated that the kids came banging on her door to wake her up to tell her that something happened. However, the home they were in is very small, and one would think that a gunshot could be easily heard. She told the 911 dispatcher that the boy shot himself. Rodney, the owner of the home, was a reserve Washington Parish Sheriff's deputy at the time. He was also the owner of the guns and was apparently not questioned after the incident. He was allowed to stay in the home during the investigation while the others went to the police station to give their testimonies. The police said he even moved the gun because Brett was lying on it and put it up against the wall. When emergency services arrived minutes later, Brett was still breathing and moaning. They noted that no one seemed upset or were crying, and it appeared that someone had taken control of the situation and all the children were sitting in one room emotionless. While at the police station, a recorded statement shows that April, when asked by the investigator how she became aware of the shooting, blurts out that the kids pounded on her door and said, "Miss April, Tommy shot him." She then quickly changes that to, not Tommy, he shot himself." Incredibly, the investigators let that statement pass without comment. After arriving at the hospital, Brett's parents were informed by the neurosurgeon that he disagreed with the sheriff deputy's assertion that the shooting was self-inflicted. He said that with the entry angle and projection of the bullet, there is no way Brett could have pulled the trigger even if he was a contortionist. According to his mother, she begged to have his hands tested for gunshot residue, but authorities refused. The guns were also not fingerprinted. Sadly, Brett passed away 2 days later after he was taken off life support and his organs were donated to help others. Strangely, Brett's body was sent to a coroner 3 hours away, despite coroners being closer. The coroner that he was sent to documented that he was with the body on the 25th, but Brett wasn't taken off life support until the 27th. Also, about 2 years later, this same coroner claimed that 22-year-old Victor White committed suicide by shooting himself in the chest while his hands were handcuffed behind his back in 2014. The police determined that Brett inadvertently shot himself primarily based on statements collected at the scene. A Washington Parish grand jury declined to charge anyone in connection with his death, citing they did not see any evidence that anyone other than Brett was involved in his own death. According to the Wittners, Chief Criminal Deputy Scott Blair made repeated false claims. For example, Blair reported to the Daily News in Bogalusa that Brett shot himself in the temple, and he gave the Heat magazine an inaccurate gunpowder residue result. Vincent Molino, a senior piping designer in computer software and friend of the Wittner family, said by using the coroner's report measurements of the entry wound, a model of the victim, the size in centimeters of the .22 caliber rifle, and a computer drafting program, he recreated the incident in a 3D video model. The designer stated, "When I put the model of Donna's boy and the gun, and the angle of trajectory of the wounds, it's not just 99% impossible, it is 100% impossible to be self-inflicted because the gun was in such a backward and upward parallel position behind him." The coroner issued a death certificate in May 2012. It said, according to the measurements of the reported weapon, this could be self-inflicted. Brett's mother, Donna, who is a drafting technician, did not find the report credible, and neither did Terry M. King, member of Concernment Citizens for St. Tammany, a local organization that champions transparent and good governance. There isn't much I can say about what occurred on Brett's report, but I do know that the coroner is the most corrupt bastard in the country, said King. I have absolutely no faith in the work that agency does, period. Both St. Tammany and Washington parishes are under the auspices of the 22nd Judicial Court, its District Attorney Warren Montgomery, and the coroner's offices. Its former DA, Walter Reed, was convicted by a jury in federal court New Orleans in 2016 on 18 counts of political corruption, including mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and making false statements on his income tax returns. He was sentenced to 4 years, but requested release before 1 year due to the COVID-19 concerns. His brother was indicted in 2015 on kidnapping and sexual battery charges. Also, Jack Strain, one of the St. Tammany's parish's most powerful elected officials during 2 decades as sheriff, was recently found guilty and sentenced to life in prison for 8 sex crimes against boys, including 4 counts of aggravated rape, including incest. Also, Peter Galvin, the former Washington Parish coroner, was placed in federal prison after he pleaded guilty to inappropriately spending public funds and resigned his position in October 2013. He was then sentenced in 2014 on federal charges after he pleaded guilty to taking money illegally from jail contracts with the city of Slidell. Also, this is not the same coroner involved in Brett's case, but he is part of the judicial circuit where Brett's death occurred and possible corruption. In 2012, Lee Dresselhaus, who is an investigator at a private investigation firm, completed an independent report and finding based on a review of the police reports, the pathologist report, crime scene photos, the first responders report, a crime lab result, and witness statements in Brett's death. Dresselhaus, who is a retired detective with over 20 years of law enforcement experience, said the police acted horrendously negligent. He said evidence was ignored, disregarded, or undiscovered. Witness statements contained numerous contradictions and outright falsehoods. He said 2 spent shell casings were found, yet only 1 bullet was accounted for, the bullet that killed Brett Wittner. Only 1 of the 8 kids that night was tested for gunshot residue. The result was listed as indeterminate. Dresselhaus said the facts support the conclusion that someone shot Brett either accidentally or with malice, and that Brett was a victim of a potential homicide. In the exhaustive investigative report, he concluded this shooting did not occur the way the officially sanctioned police reports say it did. It is also my contention that the conclusions of the Sheriff's Office investigators, as well as the District Attorney's Office, that Brett Wittner shot himself behind his right ear with a .22 caliber Henry repeating rifle are in error. Donna said justice for her son's life was denied by the officials who covered up for the shooter, the homeowner and his girlfriend, her children, and their families who have close familial and community ties to Washington Parish Sheriff's Office and the District Attorney's Office. She said, in fact, the homeowner still works as a mailbox deputy sheriff at Washington Parish Sheriff's Office. Law enforcement officials had little or no desire to find out what truly happened at the sleepover party, she said. We were re-victimized by those that swore to uphold the law, she added. A former sheriff deputy with the same sheriff's office, who requested his identity be withheld for fear of retaliation, said that when he was employed as a sheriff deputy during the time of the investigation, that he saw firsthand the nepotism, favoritism, and cover-up that exists there. Meanwhile, the Wittners have screenshot conversations about Brett's death on Facebook where kids were talking. However, authorities said they don't use those kinds of statements as evidence. His mother states that from time to time, police will drive by her home and shine their lights through her windows. His mother was interviewed on a podcast called The Transparency Project. Towards the end of the podcast, she describes all the injustices that have occurred and blames it on the good old boys helping the good old boys. His mother states that she believes she knows who shot her son and hopes that her son one day receives justice, but as of today, this case remains unsolved. The links to the podcast with his mother and the video about the alleged cover-up and scientific evidence using the bullet trajectory can be found in the description. Oneal Moore was born April 23, 1931, and his case is one of the oldest cases in Louisiana and occurred during the peak of the civil rights movement. Oneal was a major figure in the town of Barnadoe, Louisiana. He was a U.S. Army veteran, a leader in his church, his Masonic Lodge, and the PTA. In 1965, he was 34 years old and married with 4 young daughters who idolized him. In 1964, Oneal Moore and David Creed Rogers were the first African-American deputy sheriffs hired to work for the Washington Parish Sheriff's Office. While the job came with a lot of pride, it also worried his family endlessly, especially his mother. On June 2, 1965, exactly 1 year and 1 day into their employment, Oneal and Creed spent the day patrolling together, and it was Oneal's turn to drive. They were used to harassment, so they weren't surprised when a pickup truck began to tailgate them. The pair had just crossed the railroad tracks on Main Street in Barnadoe, headed to Oneal's home, where his wife Maybella had their catfish supper ready. However, they diverted at the last minute to check out a brush fire. Moments later, men in a dark-colored 1954 Chevrolet pickup truck pulled up alongside their patrol car and opened fire. Oneal lost control of the vehicle and crashed into an oak tree just at the end of the road where he lived, dying instantly from a gunshot wound. Creed was also shot, but was able to radio in a description of the vehicle, a dark-colored pickup truck with a Confederate flag decal on the front. Chief Deputy Sheriff Doyle Holliday would arrive a few minutes later. He immediately began an intense investigation that would consume the next several months. As Creed was being taken away in an ambulance, he described the truck to Doyle in precise detail. Using this description, Doyle put an all-points bulletin out on the truck. Within 1 hour later, suspect and driver Ernest Ray McElveen, a known white supremacist, was arrested in Tylertown, Mississippi for Oneal's murder. However, his $25,000 bail was paid, an airtight alibi supplied, and due to a lack of evidence, no charges were officially filed. Even with no charges, Chief Doyle Holliday continued to pursue his investigation. 2 weeks after the shooting, he and his family were sitting in the living room when shots were suddenly fired into their home. Doyle had his family get down on the floor and grabbed his gun and went outside. He fired at the assailant's car as they drove away from the home. He believes that he was attacked to try and scare him into stopping the investigation. However, he and the others involved in the investigation refused to back down. The FBI investigated the individuals who contributed to McIlveen's bail, including the main contributor, Saxon Farmer, who provided over $10,000. Farmer was head of the Klan Bureau of Investigation for Washington Parish and the leader of the reported 5 Klan units in the parish. In 1965, Farmer refused to provide a statement to the FBI and continued to refuse until 1990 when he was subpoenaed to the grand jury. The FBI reopened their investigation in 1990, 2001, and again in 2009 under the Civil Rights Era Cold Case Initiative. However, there would still be no new charges filed against McIlveen nor the other 2 suspects authorities believed were involved in the shooting. The Deacons for Defense and Justice, an organization founded in 1964 to protect civil rights activists from the Ku Klux Klan, protected and supported the Moore family in the years that followed. Bogalusa was described as one of the worst areas during the civil rights movement. Soon after her husband, Oneal's murder, Mayvella had thought about getting her revenge by putting a pistol in her handbag and going to a whites-only day at the local fair. She had planned to wait for someone to say something to her about her husband, then retaliate. But nothing was said and the gun was never used. Author Stanley Nelson explores the case in his book, Clan of Devils, The Murder of a Black Louisiana Deputy Sheriff. Creed Rogers lost the use of one eye in the shooting, but was able to retire as captain for the Sheriff's Department in 1988 and died in 2007 at the age of 84. All 3 men got away with Oneal's murder and went on to commit other crimes, and as of today, there has been no justice and this case technically remains unsolved. Barbara Ann Blount was born March 29, 1950 in Alabama, but grew up in Bogalusa, Louisiana. She would later marry Henry Blount, and the couple settled in Holden, Louisiana, and raised 2 children. At the age of 58, Barbara was a widow and lived alone and was described as a very cautious woman who even carried a gun with her when she went outside to milk the cows. Her 2 adult children, Ricky and Christy, lived on the same road that she did, and she cooked dinner for them daily, and they say she never left home without letting someone know. She was also a beloved Sunday school teacher at Magnolia Baptist Church in Holden. On May 2, 2008, about 11:30 a.m., Barbara spoke to a neighbor on the phone while at her home at 35580 Highway 1036 in Holden. She mentioned to her neighbor that she was spring cleaning and organizing her kitchen cabinets. At lunchtime, her daughter Christy called her mother from work, but she strangely didn't answer the phone, which was very unusual. She called again 3 hours later, and there was still no answer. Christy then called her cousin, who lived nearby, and asked him to drive down the road to check on her mom. When Barbara's nephew, Raymond, arrived at the home with Christy still on the phone, he noticed that her car was gone, the door was open, and her cordless phone was lying outside near the steps with the battery next to it as if she had dropped it. While calling out for his Aunt Barbara and searching the house, he noticed that her cell phone and eyeglasses were still inside, which she never left home without. Pots and pans were stacked on the kitchen floor, and valuables were left out in plain view, and it didn't appear that there had been a robbery. Her handgun was also lying on the dresser. That's when her nephew and daughter decided to call police. Meanwhile, a couple traveling in the area, Wesley and Terry Collins, were heading back home to Alabama and reported having seen a woman matching Barbara's description standing outside her car that day, wearing a tank top, pinstriped shorts, and purple LSU Crocs. The couple was pulling a camper, slowing in the curve, so they were able to get a good look. The couple said she had a frightened look on her face, and there was a white man sitting in a late-model white pickup truck parked behind her car, which was pulled off the road onto Road 7. When the couple passed, the man was wearing mirrored glasses, had light-colored blonde hair with dark roots, with a thin, sunken face. He had a blank expression and slumped in the seat and pushed his head back towards the door panel like he didn't want to be seen. The driver said it bothered them bad enough to call Crime Stoppers to report it. She was not known to leave home dressed in a tank top and Crocs, another sign that she wasn't planning on leaving home. About 4:15 p.m., just minutes after her family reported her missing, a boy coming home on the school bus recognized her 2006 silver Toyota Camry. It was about a quarter of a mile from her home off Road 7, a dirt road in a hunting club about 25 or 30 yards off the main road and mostly hidden by trees. Also, her car keys were found in the gravel about 20 yards from the car. The boy told his mother, who in turn called the Livingston Parish Sheriff's Office to report it. When police arrived, there was water on the floor of the vehicle from a rainstorm which hindered the investigation, and it didn't let up throughout the entire weekend. As the floodwaters subsided the following Monday, volunteers combed the woods on foot and horseback, searching for days. Texas EquiSearch searched the area in the heat and standing waters from the recent flooding with cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar. The couple that may have seen Barbara immediately before her alleged abduction returned to Louisiana to speak to investigators after they saw a missing persons report of the woman. Sadly, the case would go cold. Her family believes that she was taken from her home against her will, forced to travel in her car the quarter of a mile until being picked up by another vehicle. There were many valuables in her home that were all untouched, therefore it appears that she was specifically targeted for unknown reasons. There's a theory that her disappearance is related to the June 2004 death of her husband, 55-year-old Henry Blount Jr. While he was driving a gasoline tanker truck owned by the Lard Oil Company, he picked up more than 8,000 gallons of fuel at the Chalmette refinery in Louisiana. Despite having an impeccable driving record, he left the plant that morning in the rain and crossed the railroad track in front of a freight train. Signals marked the crossing, but there were no automatic arms to stop traffic. In addition, the signal light was located behind the white line where vehicles are to stop, making it more difficult to see. Tragically, 2 railroad employees were also killed in the accident, 58-year-old Dennis Vincent of Covington, Louisiana, and 58-year-old Tony Mills of Carrier, Mississippi. A third employee, 38-year-old Charles Labella of Chalmette, Louisiana, was injured but jumped to safety before the metal of the train melted. Members of the locomotive union blamed Henry for their deaths and said the 2 railroad employees had been murdered. However, it's unclear whether the accident is tied to Barbara's disappearance nearly 4 years later. Her family said she had also not dated at all since her husband passed away 4 years prior, eliminating the possibility of a relationship gone wrong. As of today, Barbara still remains missing and the case unsolved. Nelda Louise Hardwick was born January 3, 1959. At the age of 34, she lived in Lake Charles, Louisiana, had 4 children, and was described as a devoted mother. On the evening of October 14, 1993, she bathed her children as usual and put them to bed. She apparently left sometime during the night, leaving a note for her live-in boyfriend stating that she was going to the store and would return in a short time. However, she never returned, and her boyfriend would report her missing the very next day. She would basically vanish into thin air, and with no leads or information, her case would go cold. Nearly 5 years later, on May 8, 1998, a truck driver found a deceased woman's body on Interstate 10 in Hancock County, Mississippi, near mile marker 4. The unidentified woman had been struck by a vehicle, and the location was about 250 miles from Lake Charles, Louisiana, where Nelda went missing. The incident had occurred only a few hours earlier in the middle of the night by some teenagers who thought they had hit a deer and didn't stop. They would come forward to the police about it after seeing it on the news. The Jane Doe found was estimated to be between 37 and 42 years old, with no teeth and no dentures found. She had naturally brown hair that had been dyed and unique colored eyes. She had a C-section scar and had given birth at least twice. She suffered from black lung disease, emphysema, and chronic bronchitis, and there was a thick mucus present in her lungs. She had 7 ephedrine guaifenesin pills found in her back pocket that one would use for thick mucus or respiratory issues. Her legs and underarms were unshaven, and she had dirty fingernails. Her ears were not pierced, and there were no signs of alcohol or drugs in her system. Then in 2013, 20 years after she went missing, Nelda's relatives identified the Jane Doe as being her based on photographs taken of the body. Nelda also wore dentures, and one leg was shorter than the other, although it is unclear if the autopsy revealed that the Jane Doe's legs were different lengths. However, police also theorized that the body could belong to Faye Eileen Self, who disappeared from Red River Parish, Louisiana. On the night of March 30th, 1983, Faye left her infant daughter with her mom. She was last seen at the Wagon Wheel Bar and Restaurant in Ormstead, Louisiana, in the company of one female, Lucretia, and two white males. The friends in the bar said that she told them she was leaving to go get her daughter since she had to be at work early the next day. However, she never arrived at her mom's house, and her car was still in the parking lot the next day. Her family says she did have a wild streak, but she was very responsible when it came to her daughter and would never have left willingly. If the Jane Doe was indeed Faye, she would have been missing for 15 years by that point and would have been about 310 miles from where she went missing. In 2006 in Colorado, Robert Charles Brown, a Red River Parish native, was indicted for the 1987 death of 15-year-old Rocio Sperry. Brown claimed responsibility for Faye's death, as well as two other women in Red River Parish, and that of 47 other people across the United States. Brown stated he met her in the wagon wheel on the night of her disappearance and later went to her apartment, where he also worked as the maintenance man at the time. He said he entered her unlocked apartment, found her asleep, used chloroform on her, and left to go get a rope. He claimed that when he returned, she was dead, and he dumped her body in a river. However, the Jane Doe had no teeth, and Faye had some of her own lower teeth and wore dentures, but after being missing for 15 years, it's possible she had no teeth left just like Nelda. Faye and Nelda both had unpierced ears, just like the Jane Doe. The body had hydatid cyst caused by a parasite she had contracted by eating unsanitary food. It was determined that she had recently eaten French fries and pickle slices in a thick brown liquid. She also had bug bites all over her body. The coroner stated there was only a 1 in 1,000 chance that she was not Nelda, and speculated she had been abducted and held captive for years after her 1993 disappearance, then escaped, only to be killed on the highway. Nelda's family begged a judge to order an exhumation of the Jane Doe's grave to collect DNA for comparison. But it was what didn't match up that left the judge questioning if Jane Doe really could be Nelda Hardwick. Her sister testified that Nelda had a scar on her right arm from a polio vaccine. The autopsy report showed Jane Doe also had a vaccination scar, but it was on her left arm, not right. Also, the woman did have a scar on her stomach near her belly button, but it was below the navel, not above it like Nelda's family described. While the judge decided whether to order the exhumation, she ordered Nelda's niece to clean the grave marker she defaced by writing Nelda's name and date of birth on it. In a moment of emotion, her niece said she couldn't stand the thought of her name not being on the headstone and truly believed it was her body buried there. When the judge agreed to the exhumation and the grave was opened, they were shocked to find a man's body inside, not a woman's. This could possibly be due to the devastating floods caused by Hurricane Katrina in 2005, causing many headstones to be moved. The remains of the Jane Doe have still not been found, and Nelda Hardwick and Faye Self remain listed as missing to this day. Teresa Marie Wren Gilcrease was born on February 14, 1958, to Elvin and Carol in Ohio and later moved to Louisiana. She was described as very smart, giving, and an animal lover driven to help others. She graduated Alexandria Senior High School in 1976 and then earned a bachelor's degree and then a master's degree in social work from LSU. She married and had a daughter named Tricia that she absolutely adored. She later divorced and remarried a man named Shannon. She and her husband, Shannon, a pharmacist, moved from Louisiana to Baker City, Oregon for a better job opportunity, while her daughter remained in Alexandria to finish her senior year in high school while living with her grandparents. In 2002, she traveled to Alexandria for her daughter's high school graduation. She flew into Dallas, Texas, and drove a rental car to her parents' home in Boyce, Louisiana, and planned to stay in town for a month to visit family and friends. While back in town, 44-year-old Teresa went to a pool hall called The Stick on MacArthur Drive in Alexandria. She was later seen leaving the bar with a man on June 10, 2002, about 1:30 a.m., but no one recognized the man. Hours later, a farmer discovered her deceased body at 6:45 a.m. in a remote area at 132 Jenkins Road in Alexandria near the LSU campus. A witness reported Teresa and a man left in the suspect's vehicle, leaving her rental car, which was later found in the Stick's parking lot. Her purse and cell phone has never been located. A sketch was made of the unidentified man she was seen leaving the pool hall with. Detectives eliminated more than 50 suspects within the first year of the crime, including Jason Austin, a Louisiana State Police trooper who a tipster identified as being connected to the murder. He was questioned, and his attorney stated that he passed a polygraph test and his patrol car was searched for evidence. Austin later resigned due to the tension caused by suspicions of his involvement. Teresa's husband had a solid alibi in Oregon and was eliminated as a suspect. Her sister believes a suspect interviewed in the year after her sister's murder is responsible and has described a strained relationship between her family and some investigators. Several people at the pool hall were placed under hypnosis to try to further describe the suspect, but it is unclear if that was successful, and as of today, this case remains unsolved.